This is When Does Brahms Come In podcast. I'm Sofia, and today we're going to have a talk about the great Austrian composer who was the brightest founder of musical romanticism, Franz Schubert. His works are among the most famous examples of music of the Romantic period. The future brilliant composer was born in 1797 into the family of a school teacher. They were poor, and it was planned that the son would continue his father's work, and there were no talks about the success in the music world. But at an early age, the boy showed his high abilities for music. He received his first lessons in his home, then at parish school. Franz studied at the Vienna convict, a closed boarding school for singers at the church. Over the years spent in the institution, Schubert became greatly disillusioned with the church dogma, although he turned to the spiritual genre throughout his life. Franz Schubert was a very talented student. The teachers even refused to teach him, saying, "God taught him, and I have nothing to do with him." He received his first experience as a composer at the age of 13, and when he turned 15, Antonio Salieri began to teach him. Schubert was expelled from the choir of the court chapel when his voice began to break, and then he had to decide on choice of a profession. His father insisted that the son should be a teacher, and Franz gave in. By the way, he even worked at the school for 4 years. But this didn't suit the spiritual impulses of Franz Schubert. All his thoughts were only about music. He composed in his free time, played a lot of music in the small circle of friends, and one day made an important decision to devote himself entirely to music. At the same time, Schubert fell in love with the young Teresa Grob. The feelings were mutual, and the girl expected a marriage proposal from him, but the composer was very poor. His income was barely enough to support his own existence, let alone support his family. He was left alone. And like his contemporaries Liszt and Chopin, Schubert didn't have brilliant performing skills and therefore couldn't gain fame as a performing pianist. Publishing works didn't bring him any money. Publishers didn't want to publish works by a little-known composer. He performed in small salons and received financial support from his close friends. And all his experience from life were reflected in his music. This was an endless monologue of a man mature beyond his years. Chamber music is filled with endless sincerity of feelings. During his short life, Schubert wrote more than 600 vocal compositions, romances, and songs. If we count the fact that many were not recorded, then their number would reach 700 or even more. Schubert owns 9 symphonies and a large number of chamber and solo piano works. His most famous symphony is the 8th, Unfinished. The composer began to work on it in 1822. Schubert was one of those who first wrote the piano version and then worked on the orchestration. He orchestrated only 2 movements, and the third and fourth remained only as sketches. But the fact that the symphony was not completed can be considered false, since after working on it, he is actively involved in other projects. And Schubert, as his friends noted, couldn't start something new without completing the old. Franz gave the score of this work to his friend Anselm Hüttenbrenner, who was a famous musician. But, fearing that his friend would be disgraced, he left the score without attention. Now we have access to the first and second parts of this great symphony. In the early 1820s, Franz Schubert started to have problems with health. His immunity was very weak, and a cold was very difficult to bear. In 1828, he fell ill with a typhoid fever, from which he died in November of the same year. He was buried in a separate grave, but didn't leave behind enough funds to pay for the funeral. Franz sold the composer's piano, which he acquired after his only major concert. But for the most of his life, Schubert did not have a grand piano, and he composed on the guitar. Recognition came to Franz Schubert much later. It is worth noting that Schubert was very absent-minded and often forgot that this or that work belonged to him. The manuscripts were stored on forgotten shelves in his friends' closets. When most of them were discovered, many important musicians began to perform them, thereby recognizing Schubert's influence on the musical world. Johannes Brahms was the person thanks to whom the first edition of all of the works of Franz Schubert was published in 1897. Brahms will come to see us again, but for now, see you soon. This was When Does Brahms Come In podcast, and sincerely yours, Sofia.